But yes, we are live. We see people popping in here. Welcome. For people who follow me, my name is Ahmed. You probably know of Aaron Rupar from his legendary clipping skills over the years. He needs really no introduction, but I'm gonna pop in here and just talk about how consistent this guy's been since I think 2017, right? Since the
Yep.
Think Progress days, right?
Yep.
You've been clipping, you were at Vox, you now run Public Notice, this really
hmm
awesome newsletter, which if you're watching and you're not a subscriber yet, go do that. The insights are always top notch. And I just wanted to have you on because we have really been in this avalanche in the last 100 days, right? But people like you who have been really watching maybe more Trump content than any human being should probably consume, right-wing media content. You have seen pretty much a lot of his rally speeches. So he's been saying he was going to do a lot of this. I always like to gauge when I have people on, like, are you surprised by any of what you've seen so far? Or is this kind of just, well, we expected Donald to do all these things. So here we are. But what's your take on where we're at?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Ahmed, it's good to be on the show with you. Ahmed is one of those people we've interacted on Twitter for many, many years, but we've never been on a call or met in any way, shape, or form. So it's good to see your face and chat. And thanks for having me on. But on the Trump 100 days, the main thing, I guess that there's two things I've been surprised about that kind of stand out. One is just the kind of egregious lawlessness that we've seen. I think we understood that Trump doesn't respect the rule of law. You can go back obviously to the January 6th coup attempt, and not even to get into the all of the felony charges that he was hit with and the conviction in New York. But just the kind of manufacturing of a constitutional crisis, like right out of the gates. The open defiance of the courts, which they're still kind of pretending that they're not doing, but I guess I wouldn't have been surprised if you told me coming in that Trump at some point would defy the courts, but I wouldn't have thought it would come so soon and over kind of a marginal issue. I think that
Yeah.
in terms of what Trump is, what Trump wants to accomplish. I mean, and maybe I shouldn't characterize it that way, but because I think he is trying to kind of strike fear into people and kind of project an image of lawlessness, that he is the law, that he's kind of above the courts. But that he's doing this over, basically rendition flights to El Salvador. I wouldn't have predicted that coming in. So that's one aspect that I've been surprised by. And then the other are the economic policies, and not tariffs specifically, because as you kind of alluded to, this was something that he talked about a lot on the campaign trail. And he wasn't kind of coy about the fact that he is a big tariffs fan and planned to implement many of them. But just the scale of them, and then I think going, kind of pressing the tariff button over and over before he got to tax cuts, kind of the contractionary policies that are leading us seemingly into a recession, and that have obviously kind of put some cold water on the stock market. I think there was kind of an assumption with Trump that was decently well founded, that he's this businessman and he's into low interest rates and a strong job market and a good stock market and all this stuff. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing that that's not really the case. And I'm not totally sure if that's because he is a lame duck, or should be. I mean, he may try to run for a third term, as we've kind of learned, and that shouldn't be a surprise either. But it just seems like he's kind of unmoored from small d democratic accountability.
Yeah.
He's not really as concerned about public opinion as he was like in 2017 and 2018. And there seems to be kind of this mentality infusing the whole administration of short-term pain for, some presumptive benefit in the future, kind of reorienting our trade relationships and things like that. But this is not the Trump that we really thought that he was, right? I mean, we kind of thought that he was this guy who, was into kind of the sugar highs and,
Hmm.
just winning the news cycle and, short term planning, if there is any planning. But, it seems like he's kind of operating with a longer term vision that and maybe that's almost too kind of a way to put it, because I think a lot of it is about kind of corruption. It's about kind of the turning the government into a protection racket, making these companies and countries come to him to get exceptions from tariffs, and kind of putting himself in that position to dole out favors and to punish his enemies, more so than like kind of a policy vision of what trade should be. But anyway, so yeah, those are the two things that stand out to me as surprises in the first 100 days.
Yeah, I mean that's really spot on because I actually did get taken aback by a little bit of the speed too. Because one of the things with Project 2025 and everything else was the idea that he was going to come in and be a more well-oiled machine, right? It was that they were going to kind of move more methodically. Like you'd have Russell Vought in there, you'd have some of these people like laser targeting statutes, right? Like they would try to maybe challenge the constitutionality of the Impoundment Act of 1974, like that they were going to go in there and maybe have the courts greenlight it, right? Like I thought, given last year you know, with the ruling, the immunity ruling, that they were kind of just going to go a traditional, let's make the unitary executive theory real through Chief Justice Roberts. So I was a little taken aback when Elon came out here with a little chainsaw, just like, you know what, we're just going to yell about implementing this crazy agenda. And so
Mhm.
I think you're right. Like I kind of also expected a little bit more of a, no, I wouldn't say disciplined Trump because I know he's not. But like the second the cabinet picks were chosen, I was like, oh man.
Yeah, no,
I was like, oh man, we're about to
you're
get.
right.
I was
Because
like, we're
that
about to
that
get.
feels Yeah, that feels like ancient history, but that really is kind of worth reflecting on a bit because I was surprised by that too.
Yeah.
Now, we knew that there'd be some clowns. I mean, there were in the first term as well, but especially like when the Matt Gaetz for AG, when news broke about that, or Pete Hegseth.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we probably should have known. That was really the first time after. I mean, obviously, I had a big pit in my stomach on election night itself, and staying up late that night. Trump had his, kind of victory speech at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I couldn't even really bring myself to clip it. It was like one of those
Yeah, yeah.
moments of like, I don't even want to watch this. But then it kind of, then there was about a week of sort of, just like coming to terms with everything. But and then when the cabinet nominations hit, it was like, wow, like this is going
Yeah.
to be, this is going to be really bad because it would have been out of character for Trump. Like this wasn't really ever going to happen, but there was certainly like, if Trump was a different person, I think there was a timeline available to him where he just kind of stuffs the administration full of like Bill Barr, Steve Mnuchin type conservatives who at least have like the credentials to be in their roles. And, he could have just done a bunch of border security and done some tax cuts and like
Yeah.
kind of coasted, and probably would have, we saw when he came into his inauguration that his approval was at kind of a high watermark. There's those
Hmm.
first few weeks where he's kind of flirting with 50% approval. And, I think if he had more of a traditional approach to this term, a traditional Republican approach, that would have probably worked out better politically for him, but that just wasn't what he was ever up to. He seems much more intent on kind of burning the whole thing down in a way that I think people didn't completely process, although they should have, because
Exactly.
his campaign was really, really ugly. It was a really, largely about his legal problems and trying to get revenge on people. And so, to the extent that people thought they were kind of pulling the lever for tax cuts and better economic policies, that was never really what his campaign was about. And so,
Yeah.
that's a failure, I think, of voters, but also I think that's a media failure that the stakes weren't really conveyed to people, and that so many people were kind of misinformed about what they were voting for.
No, exactly. And it really is because I like to say that people thought they could order Trump a la carte. Like they thought
Mhm.
they could just, oh, I'll focus on the corporate tax cuts. And if I really focus as hard as I can on that and will that into existence, he'll only pursue that. That's what those Wall Street, business leaders thought they could do. I guess they thought they could manifest their way into a disciplined Trump and ignore everything else. But, as we're seeing, you get everything with this guy when you order in a Trump 2.0. Like you're gonna get he said all of this. Like you've been watching all of these rallies, and I want to get to that in a second. But first, like everyone who's commenting, appreciate y'all. Keep commenting. We're gonna get to some pop in, maybe some questions as we're having the discussion. Also, make sure to subscribe to Public Notice if you can. Subscribe to my newsletter if you can. That's what keeps this stuff going because what you do is a real vital service, and I think of just objectively because it's almost like with this clipping, you know, we all knew Trump was wild, right? But when you have you and kind of Asen, or in my opinion, kind of like the AP wire of like video in the digital era, right? Like there isn't really, if you don't have a cable news top like box or YouTube TV, you're not going to see the craziness going on, right? In these segments. So when you surface these, you see that as kind of like your role in the media landscape. Of course, your newsletter also has an excellent takes as well. But do you
Mhm.
see like your broader impact as like surfacing kind of this the delusion of the right?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think it's kind of explaining what's going on the right for a largely progressive audience.
Hmm.
I mean, although I do have people across the spectrum who follow me, but I just kind of view it as another form of reporting. Every day there's news being made, especially I hate to say it, but especially with Republicans being in power. Like Maria Bartiromo show when she has Scott Bessent or Kevin Hassett on. There's a lot of news being made in these interviews, or she'll have Mike Johnson on or John Thune and. So yeah, I mean, I just kind of view it as, just like the reporters at the Capitol kind of stick the recorders and they do the walk and talk.
Hmm.
I surface nuggets that happen on TV or happen on streams. But yeah, I mean, I've always kind of viewed it since day one as, kind of immersion in the right and trying to shed light on what's going on there for my audience, which oftentimes, isn't watching a lot of Fox or, aren't watching Trump rallies. They're curious about what happened there, but people have lives and, this is my job. So, I kind of step in and immerse myself and watch it and share it with people for them.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you've been doing it for so long, since 2017, since the first Trump term, and I remember in 2017 or that time, that's when I started personally doing the. I used to have a column where I documented every day of the presidency, and that's why I have no hair anymore. Uh, it was
Me too.
yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just like it's a sacrifice that had to be made for the greater good. But basically, this time I'm trying to take it a little easier, and I know, like, I think I watched you in Nir's your reoccurring Substack live, which is also great. I recommend anyone to go watch especially the last video on the art of the clipping. But like, I think you also talked about how now you're also this time taking a little bit more of a less like intensive 24/7 route because now you have public notice, you have writers. So is that part of like also maintaining sanity during this? Is like not being as immersed in it day to day, or is it more so just expanding the media empire a little bit by having the writers in?
It's a little both. I mean, so the first term when I was clipping, I was at Think Progress and then I was at Vox. And so like my main job there was I was an editor by title, but I was writing,
Hmm.
usually like one or two, sometimes three items a day. That at Vox was kind of, in their style. So it's kind of like explanatory journalism, but I was doing kind of like quicker hitting stuff. And a lot of it was integrated with the clipping because I would be writing up Trump events or like, the Trump press briefings or his rallies and kind of doing like takes and little explainers. But that was kind of the main gig. So, it was more of like I would say like a 60-40 writing. Most of my time was spent actually writing. Whereas now it's probably more like 40-60 with clipping being like 60%. And then I'm
Hmm.
editing and I'm writing a little bit, now and then. But, and a part of it is having two young kids this time around, which I didn't have the first time, like, especially in the evenings, they take up a lot of my time. And so it's just, like during COVID, I was, there was a period there where I was clipping like 12, 13 hours a day because like I didn't have kids and everybody's quarantined. And then,
Yeah.
the White House was doing these briefings throughout the day. And that was really, and I didn't really have a problem doing that because, I always find the work to be interesting and like, I'm just kind of naturally curious about what's going on in our society and in politics. So it never feels like a burden. And,
Hmm.
if I'm just sitting around at home with nothing to do, like my default is kind of like, oh, let's see what's going on, in cable news. Like, is there a political event going on that I can clip? But also, there's an awareness now that like we are in this for the long haul, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And this is kind of, there's been like Midas on Tuesday night. I was clipping the Trump, he had a rally and then he was also on ABC for like a big 100 days
Oh yeah.
interview, that made some news for sure. But Midas, so Asen was clipping the Midas Democratic governor's town hall that they had, which I think they hosted. And that's like a great event, but like it's like, man, 2028 is so far away, and like even the midterms
Yeah.
are a really long ways off. And I get that, like, if you work in Democratic politics, if you really care about Democratic politics, like we need to already be kind of thinking about like what's that campaign going to look like? Where
Hmm.
should I invest my resources to try to help Democrats retake the House? What can Democrats do better, to hopefully win in 2028? But like, it's a long way away. We got to pace ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
I enjoy politics, but I have a life outside of it. Like I enjoy right now I'm obsessed obviously with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Like they're
Hmm.
defeating the Lakers last night. They're making a
Oh
playoff
yeah.
run. Like I got to carve out time to watch them. And like, maybe that's kind of the Libra in me, but I also like having some balance in my life.
Yeah.
So it's just like I'm not going to burn myself out. We have 3.5 years to go and like a year and a half until the midterms, and so it's unfortunate because like every day is kind of bringing fresh horrors, and I don't want to minimize that, but like you got to find joy where you can, and there's not a whole lot of joy in politics right now. So I think that's just part of it too. Is like if I really immerse myself into my work right now, like I did last year, for instance, during the campaign, when for most of the year it kind of felt like a 24/7 thing. I would be completely useless by the midterms, let alone 2028. So I'm just trying to pace myself a little bit more.
Yeah, I think, that's the right approach. And I know a lot of people always ask me like, how do you find balance or keep sanity? And I think that's the way to do it, right? Just literally carving out time and trying to be, present with people. Like last time 2017, I was 24, starting to document the presidency and all that. And I didn't have you know, you didn't have kids or a family. I don't have kids yet, but I think maybe next year I'm on it. But
Okay.
I have a fiance right now,
Oh,
and
congrats.
yeah, I get married next month, so I'm
Wow.
starting to have so that's also like balancing with wedding planning is also like a whole thing as well. But
Yeah.
like carving out that time, right? Like making sure you actually enjoy your life so you can maintain your joy during this. Cause like, you know, um, like when things are going on, like sometimes this is the best time to do to have those moments of joy, right? Like you don't want to have to just be existing in this state of just despair with everything happening. You want to find the pockets of joy, right? So I think that's really important because I see you post your baseball clips or like you hang out with your family, and that's good. You can't burn yourself out. So like for those who are watching, like if you're just finding yourself despairing, straight up disconnect. Like take a
Go
night. Sorry, go ahead.
touch some grass.
Yeah, touch some grass.
Literally. Yeah.
Yeah, literally go touch some grass. It's therapeutic. It's therapeutic.
Yeah.
And then, as much as we want you to read our stuff and watch all the Rupar clips, the good thing about you, Aaron, is that you watch so that we don't have to,
Yep.
or so other people don't. So you can always go find some Rupar clips and everyone's writing. But like, yeah, I'm glad we got that earlier in this too, because that's always like the key question. Like when I asked some friends, I was like, I'm gonna go on a live with Aaron. What do you think I should ask him? They were all like, ask him how he stays sane. Ask him how he stays
Yeah.
sane. So
It's
I had to,
difficult. Yeah. It's I don't I wouldn't pretend to have all the answers on that, but I just think having things outside of politics that bring you joy because like yeah, it's like tough scenes with our politics. And honestly, the election last year was kind of like an inflection point just psychologically for me in terms of thinking about American politics, where it's like, I don't want to say I've given up hope, but
yeah.
my hope has been shaken that we are capable of like making responsible choices. And I think this is kind of ties in with like the broader economic conversation too, because like
Hmm.
I think this is part of the world shifting views towards the U.S. is like, are you okay over there?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
this idea of like, even if Trump is repudiated, like Republicans get stomped out, at the midterms next year, and we have a Democratic president in 4 years. Like the world's not going to forget that we elected this guy twice,
Yeah,
and like,
exactly.
and so there is kind of that, it's like a friend who is like self-destructive, where it's like at a certain point, you care for them, but you have to kind of factor that in, and maybe you have to create some distance to kind of, not be too close to it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that applies kind of personally, but I think, we're seeing this play out in our politics, which I think, is a big part of like the macroeconomic
Hmm.
issues that we're facing is kind of like, just the self-harm that we're doing here.
Yeah, honestly, I was right about to segue to that, and you just nailed like the perfect segue to the economic topic that I was thinking of. Like, you're right. I mean, there's this now notion that you have to plan for a Democratic America or a Republican America because like it's like they now have to anticipate maybe every 4 years we might lose our mind and
Hmm.
elect someone who's going to tear up every deal that they themselves made. Like people,
Right.
I don't, when he was saying no, NAFTA was who or not NAFTA, USMCA. Who did this deal? And it's like, bro, you did that deal, man. Like we all watched you tear up
Yeah.
NAFTA and then rename it, and now you're acting like so basically, how can our allies, transactional trade partners, foreign adversaries, anyone logically anticipate what we're going to do next in the next 4 years? How can they have trust? He wants to do these blanket tariffs and say he wants to create new trade deals. Why wouldn't they just wait it out? Right? Like they don't know who's going to be in power in 4 years. They don't know if that trade deal is going to be torn up by someone else who decides they want to one day exert power, right? So we're in the situation where it could take maybe like a couple decades of consistency because now, I think even with Bush, after Bush, Obama kind of came and revitalized our image. But this is
Mhm.
this is worse. I
Oh,
mean, I know that Iraq War was totally devastating, but
yeah.
to just totally shift and like become a more predatory America overnight, like I don't. You're right. I mean, even if we win the midterms and then the presidency in 2028, our allies are still going to look and be like, hey, we love you, President Buttigieg or AOC or whatever Democrat it is, but
Mhm.
we don't know if we can make a long term deal with you because we don't know if Vance or someone waiting in the wings is going to come destroy this. So you kind of see that too. That's like that these our allies are probably going to have to. A lot of Europe probably going to remilitarize to have more heavier degree. Everyone's going to get more protectionist. So you kind of see that also as the longer term impact of this presidency, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think the key thing to look for coming out of this in terms of regaining confidence is having a saner Republican Party.
Yeah.
Because I think that's, if it was you kind of alluded to this where it's the difference between like anticipating a Republican America or a Democratic America where it wasn't so long ago that like, had Mitt Romney won in 2012, like it would have been horrible for abortion rights. Like there would have
Mm-hmm.
been a lot of bad stuff that would have happened, but like it wasn't as though our democracy was going to crumble or that,
Yeah.
suddenly we were going to be aligning ourselves with like the most predatory global players and like participating on these shakedowns of democracies that are being threatened by their neighbors or, in Ukraine's case, literally invaded by their neighbor. So just the wild pendulum swings, and I think it was easy enough for the global community to kind of view 2016 as like an aberration, like
Mm-hmm.
Trump kind of won on a fluke, like he didn't even win the popular vote, but once he gets elected twice, then it's kind of like for real. And so, as long as that is what the Republican Party is kind of this like mob style protection racket. To put it charitably, I mean, you could even go further and say it's like a cult personality type situation. I think it's going to be difficult for these other countries and global institutions to have any faith in sort of our long term prospects. So,
Yeah.
that's the thing coming out of this. Like, if the repudiation of Trump is so thorough that it results in some fundamental changes in the GOP, then maybe if our
Mm-hmm.
elections get back into a more normal mode of like if the Republican wins, they're not going to necessarily burn everything down. Then I think you can engage in some more long term planning. But like the thing that's so notable with the tariff stuff in a way to me is that I watched a lot of Maria Bartiromo, obviously, and like she's obviously not a fan of tariffs, even if she has to kind of like toe the line on her show or like kind of dance around it. But the thing that she's always harping on when she interviews the administration officials, the Republicans who go on her show, is the lack of certainty and like
Mm-hmm.
how the uncertainty surrounding tariffs is really bad for the markets. It's really bad for business leaders. And Trump, this has been a topic for a month now. Like he must be aware of this on some level, or at least like Scott Bessent, Lutnick, like these guys definitely are. And yet we still see, even this week now there's talk of like, we're gonna roll back some of the auto tariffs and like,
Mm-hmm.
he's just constantly tinkering with the tariffs. And that's the whole problem. I mean, in some
Yeah.
ways, the tinkering is almost more problematic than just having the tariffs, where like at least you can
Exactly.
plan. But the fact that, like, why would you, if you are GM and you're thinking of bringing one of your plants in Mexico back to the United States, and then Trump this week, suddenly now, is kind of changing the terms where, like, maybe the incentives aren't the same for that, or you can get away with still having that plant in Mexico. Like, you're making decisions that, are going to play out over many, many years, if not like a decade, to, reshore manufacturing. And if there's no certainty from week to week, let alone from year to year, what the tariff policy is going to be, then why would you, it's like paralyzing. And
Yeah.
so,
Exactly.
that's the thing where we just see that he doesn't ever learn.
Yeah.
It's, he just keeps kind of doing the same stuff. And, I thought it was so telling. He was on this News Nation town hall, which I posted some clips and then some images because like it was surreal. I don't know if you saw any of this, but like, so the
The
panel
Stephen A.
that was,
Smith one, right?
yeah, it
Yeah.
was, it
Yeah.
was Stephen A. Smith, Chris Cuomo, Bill O'Reilly, and then they had RFK Jr. was on the show. Steve Bannon joined. It was
Yeah.
like, it was like dying and waking up in hell kind of thing. Where it's like,
Yeah.
what is
Exactly.
this? Like, it's just
Nightmare blunt rotation.
yeah, so wacky. But I think it was actually Bill O'Reilly who was kind of grilling him like, Mr. President, this could really be a problem for Republicans in the midterms. And Trump's response was, oh no, like I think I'll be able to convince people how good this is or something like that, where, it wasn't that he thinks, by then the conditions will be better. It was that he thinks he can just kind of lie to people.
Hmm.
That shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody, but I think it's very telling that that's kind of where things are going. It's not that, oh no, the conditions will be so much better next year that like, no one will, no one will question the tariffs. It's that I'm just going to keep lying to people and hope that they believe me. And, his
Yeah.
base will.
Yeah, you're right. He's just leaning on his ability to disinform his base. That's
Yep.
really what he's getting at there. And you mentioned Maria Bartiromo. What's one of my favorite reoccurring segments of yours is when you check in on her like coping with the economy and like
Yep.
trying to spin it to the audience. And you're right. I mean, I think he's now in this delusional state that's even more severe than it ever was. Like I think earlier, younger Trump he actually had some kind of boundary between the bullshit and his own belief. Like you could tell he knew he was bullshitting people and lying to them. And then now he's gaslighting himself in real time. Every time he says something, he instantly is like, oh, I'm believing what I have just said. I'm now going to just continuously, move in that narrative. And we're seeing here with the uncertainties injecting, like the stubbornness. People thought the market would be the biggest check on him, right? And, obviously the bond market got him to do that momentary pause or whatever kind of, insider trading situation happened that day. But you're right. The level of uncertainty is just something you're not gonna be able to recover from it. We have a contracting Q1, one more quarter contracting. We're officially in a recession. And he's already trying to preemptively blame Biden for that. He's like, oh, Q2 will be Biden's too. And it's
Hmm.
like, dog, no one in their right mind believes this. And I think that's one of the benefits, like one of the things we're lucky of how crazy Trump is and how undisciplined and truly unhinged he is that, if it was a more competent person, someone who is less deranged or, maybe a pre-2020 election version of Donald, like, I don't think we'd be in this place where he'd be sabotaging the way he is. Cause like, although he believes he'll be able to convince his base, like the polling this week has been abysmal for him. Like it's very clear that he's limiting, there are some people like in that Frank Lutz, focus group that were like, oh, well, I'm willing to take on the pain for these
Hmm.
tariffs. But, if you have yet to articulate a long-term goal for the tariffs, if you're moving them every single day, and like you're saying, it's almost worse that he's moving the tariffs without actually, having created like a stand. Like if he just said, these are the tariffs and this is what they are, the market would not have the uncertainty and maybe you could exist. But now he's moving them back and forth. He's tanking the markets. The volatility is real. People's 401k now exists within Trump's volatile mind. It's almost like his mood is an economic indicator at this point. And what I think is, I saw someone in the comments asking like, what's the solution? And I guess you're really right. It would have to be an erosion of the Republican Party itself. It would have to be like what Lindsey Graham said, that if we nominate him, he'll destroy us. Like we
Yep.
have to see that actually come true. He has to get down into George W. Bush level approval numbers and like really
Yes.
tank the GOP heading into there. And then, you think that I hope that could be something where in 2026, 2028, we're just like the GOP's decimated. Like they just can't, there's no pathway for them. And then maybe allies could be like, okay, maybe we can work with them again.
Yeah. I think we're having this conversation at a very interesting moment because, I don't think your kind of everyday American has really experienced the worst of the tariffs yet. Like we haven't really
Exactly.
been hit with the price hikes or shortages. Like that's going to play out over, I was listening to Paul Krugman was on Brian Beutler's podcast this week, and he was talking about how, this could be kind of unfolding over next couple weeks to like 6 weeks where we start to really see some of the price shocks and whatnot. And, that's the type of thing. Now I'm kind of two minds of this because I was about to say like, that's the type of thing that could really kind of push Trump through the floor of his support. But
Mhm.
also like, how many times have we had this
Yeah.
conversation, where it's just, he's so resilient in that way where it's like, and actually one of the more interesting points that Krugman made in that conversation, which I hadn't really thought of it this way, where he was saying that like in any developed democracy, there's about 25% of the electorate that is just straight up fascist, and that's just kind of like baked in. And I thought it was interesting because before he made that observation, he said like, well, now that I'm not at the Times, I can say this. And then he
Oh
kind of laid
yeah.
out there. But I think that's true, basically, and that's true. And in the US, it's probably even a little bit higher than that. It seems like it's more 30 to 35%. We saw in Trump's first term when his approval really, during COVID,
Mhm.
once we got into the summer of 2020 and his approval really started sagging, that like the floor was around like 37, 38%. And I feel like that's still kind of true. It's probably slightly sub 40% is like his hardcore base. But like, I live in a town here in Minnesota that's like 65% Trump supporters. Pretty, Pete Hegseth's hometown. We're from the same hometown. But, and so like there's a gigantic Walmart here. And so I think about like, that Walmart shopper who votes for Trump, like in a month, if you go to Walmart and, the groceries and the household items that you get, suddenly are, 20% more expensive than they were 2 months ago. Like, are they going to kind of connect those dots or like, are they really going to listen to Trump and believe that Biden is to blame? Or so I think that's the part where, I want to kind of project rationality onto how they would process something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not totally sure. But that's why we're having this conversation, and it's still kind of it's a little theoretical yet because we will see some really severe price increases, maybe
Hmm.
even shortages, but that hasn't really happened yet, because obviously there's kind of ripple effects where like you load up the ship in China, it comes to the West Coast, the items get in trucks, they go to the East Coast, like that all
Yeah.
unfolds over many many weeks, if not like multiple months of time. And the tariffs really just went into effect April 2 it was, so it'll be a month tomorrow. So if we had this conversation a month from now or 2 months from now, it might be a very different situation.
Yeah, you're right. And then the question is, when they're experiencing that, will they connect the dots, like you're saying,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the key thing. Will they blame him? And he's taken on so much so much of the blame, right? By just saying, I like he started off, I own this economy, like it's the Trump bump, right? And now he's trying to retroactively, like I think it was yesterday that Truth Social post blaming everything on Biden. And I don't know how far the rhetoric, and again, that's how you'll know it'll probably get down to those 20s, hopefully. Like, I think when you look at a lot of the strongly approved numbers during the first term, it was always like this weird 20 to 30% that was always pretty steady, no matter what he
Hmm.
did. But when you get to that point where you're now this leader is telling you harm yourself for this cause, now you're getting to a much darker place, and you're getting to a place where the independents and the more rational people who didn't believe what we were all saying or what he was saying, right? Like, I think that's another thing that's
Yeah.
happening is that it's not like this is just happening randomly and people are disapproving. It's that people are finally, like, people have been told repeatedly by maybe family or friends or you or I or journalists and celebrities or just everyone about these specific criticisms of Trump, of what he planned to do, and literally outlined it in detail. And now I think when they see it happening in front of them, people are starting to connect the dots of like, oh, he's exactly what his critics said he is. And now it's actually harming me personally, because they just thought a lot of the times he was just going to go after these immigrants. But I don't know. We're just gonna have to see. I mean, I really think I'm hopeful still, believe it or not. Like, generally, I'll ask you what
Yeah.
your status is, but like,
Uh,
I
yeah.
yeah, I mean,
I just wish,
okay, I'll let you say the point first.
yeah, yeah. I just wish the hope wasn't like so far down the horizon at this point. We kind of talked about this already, where it's like, man, November 2026 is like, it's a year and a
Yeah,
half. Like, and it's also just hard to like. The country is going to be in a very different, probably much worse condition by then too. So we sort of project forward based on the conditions as they exist now, but like there's going to
yeah,
be so much more water under the bridge between now and then. So it's just hard to know what that and that's really the next opportunity for like a big change in the government, at least. So, unless like the economic policies become so ruinous that like Trump really starts to erode support among congressional Republicans, where things could kind of get interesting there. And we've seen a few cracks in the armor. I mean, we saw with the tariffs vote that it was pretty much party line still, but even yesterday, I took note that Ron Johnson was on Fox Business kind of saying, like, look, I'm hearing from manufacturers in Wisconsin that are saying that even a month of these tariffs and like I'm out of business, and then of
yeah,
course, like you race right from there to vote for the tariffs, basically. So it's like still kind of weird,
yeah,
but those are the types of situations that I think really could be kind of game changers where, like, if the conditions in these districts or in these states, if you're a senator, get, undeniably bad in a way that's a direct result of these policies, That's a really intense
Yeah.
variable. That's kind of different from Trump's first term, right? Because like even during COVID, which obviously Trump, was a maniac during COVID, did all sorts of irresponsible stuff. But like, you think back on those briefings and like Fauci was up there and even like
Hmm.
Birx, who was a big hack, but like she at least was like a trained medical professional who was like trying to convey responsible information, even if like it was kind of in this tortured way. And, there's no adults around him like that anymore. Like they're all
Yeah.
just kind of like enabling his absolute worst tendencies. And so it was really, during the first term, like despite all the chaos, like, COVID was kind of the first time where we really kind of touched the stove, where the consequences of having someone who, was kind of like a science denier and like, having someone in that position was really bad during a pandemic.
Hmm.
But even then, like pretty much all the countries in the world struggle with COVID. Like we were on the toward the bottom in terms of outcomes, but like it was easy enough for people to kind of sort of excuse that in the sense of like, well, any government would have struggled with that. And like, it was a really tough situation. But this tariffs thing is like, it's like we almost gave ourselves COVID. I mean, it's not as bad as
Yeah.
COVID, but it's like an
Yeah.
economic form of it, right? And it's just entirely self-inflicted. And so, and that kind of, the point that you're making about like, asking people to sacrifice and how that's a tough ask. Like, yeah, it's an especially tough ask when it's not even clear what like the end goal is here.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not like
Exactly.
it's not like World War II where it's like we need to fight back the Nazis here, or like Pearl Harbor. We were bombed. Pearl Harbor was bombed, and we need to defend our country. Like it's not even really clear. It's like, okay, we have trade deficits, and like we're going to get rid of all of our trade deficits, or like we're going to bring back all
Yeah.
these manufacturing jobs that aren't very good jobs. And while Trump wants to bring all these manufacturing jobs back, but yet like he's a huge opponent of any sort of organized labor, and he's like trying to crush unions, and like
Exactly.
I just don't think that's a vision. Again, like his hardcore base maybe is into that, but I think when you kind of broaden it out to like the voters that actually decide elections, like I don't think that is very appealing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think like, your point on the difference of having adults in the room, like is really why we have all of this happening, right? Like first term, we had Mark Esper was saying, no, you can't shoot those protesters, in the legs, as he literally asked him during the George Floyd protests. You had Don McGahn that was like, hey man, don't do that. That's actually kind of illegal. Even Bill Barr didn't go along with the 2020 election scheme. And
Yep.
and now like imagine if we had RFK in the room instead of like Dr. Burks during the COVID
Yeah.
hearings, right? Like just like going off about the others fetal, uh,
The fetal
yeah,
debris.
yeah, fetal
That
debris in the
was
vaccine.
fetus
Oh,
debris. Yeah.
yeah, fetus
Well,
debris.
see,
Like,
and that it's kind of a side tangent, but just before we got on here, I was looking at because I started I created a TikTok account like probably a month ago now, and I was looking at my videos today, like because I had finally started gaining some traction where I was posting videos and they get like at first it was like 100 views and like, that kind of things, and then now it's like getting up tens of thousands on videos. But then
oh,
today I
it's
was
great.
posting videos and I was getting like no views on my videos, and so then I did like an account health checkup, and I'm restricted already. And like the one that like broke the camel's back was the
Oh,
RFK fetal debris one, where it's like and it's kind of like I thought misinformation was like cool now, right? I mean, on
oh
X,
yeah,
it's like and of course when I post these videos, like I assume that people understand. Like I'm not
yeah.
trying to. And then it gets into a weird area with RFK because like I posted the one from yesterday, which was on this cursed News Nation town hall that RFK Jr. was also on, where he was asked, which is on point to the conversation we just had about COVID about like the measles outbreak, and one of the hosts asked him about like, so what's your message to the American people on the measles vaccine? And he went into like, well, a lot of people don't want to take it because it has fetal debris in it, like
Yeah. It was just insane.
um. And yeah, it's insane. So like, I did not include like a fact check because first, I mean,
Yeah,
I,
because
I
it's
understand that that's BS, but like, I can't really explain that in any way that's like timely. But I guess that was too much for TikTok, which, removed the video. And now because I had a strike for two, that was the second one. And the first strike I got was Ron Johnson on the Charlie Kirk show
mm,
suggesting that 9/11 was an inside
oh my
job. And that got a strike on my account too. So it's like, that may just
oh
not be the platform for me, it turns out. Because yeah, I mean, this is kind of, but it does get into where, especially during the 2020 campaign, I was very cognizant with Trump videos of always trying to include some sort of fact check in them.
Yeah.
I've gotten a little bit lazier on that. But I think a lot of the time I hope that people understand that 9/11 was not
Oh,
an
of
inside
course.
job, but TikTok does not. So, eh,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just gotta elevate. Yeah, sometimes you just have to elevate the craziness, right? Like, I think because I think some people don't really get that window into what they're saying and the fact you're even. I'm glad you're on TikTok. I was gonna ask you if you were on there because that they need to see more of what they're actually saying because I think the echo chambers kind of protect the algorithms will literally feed you like a positive stream. Like I had to like delete my TikTok algorithm when I first got it because I engaged or I hate watched an Andrew Tate video a little too long. I was just like, oh, this
oh
guy sucks. And then it just
yeah,
started feeding me just manosphere women are terrible content. And I had to like
yeah,
purge my account. And like that's what it does for other people. But I think with
oh yeah.
with you putting more of those clips out there, it'll hopefully expose more people to just the blatantly insane stuff they're saying. But yeah, I mean, overall, just on the point of the lack of guardrails this time, and just the genuine chaos. I mean, I think on your take on the administration, like you think because I probably got to let you go here soon because I'm sure there's like 1,000 things you have to clip. But like people keep posting and asking like the solution or general hope levels. I mean, I personally think just my take on like where we're at currently is that I actually was a little surprised with how dumb they went about Project 2025 and some of this stuff. Like a lot of people were more shocked, but I thought like they went phase one, phase two, and phase three all at the same time. And then Elon Musk is like the mascot, which was not written in the project. Like Musk was they didn't say Musk will be on CPAC stage with chainsaw yelling with the Argentine president. I didn't expect that. But like I almost think that they may have I don't know. They may have hindered their own. Like I think they may have hindered their own authoritarian ambitions a little bit by how fast and idiotically they've moved. I think that the tariffs are. It was not. I didn't expect them to be this insane. I didn't think they would use ChatGPT for their formulas, but I really do. I'm really starting to feel a little bit more hopeful as things have gone on. A little bit less so when it comes to the immigration cruelty and the stuff going on there, but the courts have actually been giving some glimmers of hope there. But overall, I think like the biggest hindrance to his own incompetence, or the biggest hindrance to his own authoritarian ambitions, is his incompetence. Like the stumbling, I think he's been failing a lot more than he's succeeding. Like that's kind of what I've been seeing a lot of. Where I know the consensus is more about the horrors, but like you having literally been watching every moment of this, and from the 2024 campaign to now, are you seeing that same kind of phenomenon? Are you also seeing the stumbling and just the foolishness kind of superseding? Like what we're like on the pace of is incompetence winning or is authoritarianism ahead? Where do you think which one is outpacing the other right now?
Yeah, so I agree with your point that the incompetence is hindering the authoritarianism because I think it'd be easier to consolidate authoritarianism if there was more of a desire for it.
Yeah,
But, when you kind of wreck the economy and alienate a lot of people right out of the gate, that makes that a lot more difficult. And, when you challenge the courts as directly as Trump has and sort of antagonize them,
yeah,
that's not great either. Because, I think that, the ruling that the Supreme Court made with the Abrego Garcia case kind of boxed Trump in. I mean, we're seeing that he's still kind of trying to find the wiggle room around like what did facilitate mean and what do I have to
mhm,
do. But he kind of put the court in a position where they sort of had to rule against him, and thank God that they did, because had they just kind of gone along with the program there like that, it'd be terrifying. Like where would that have ended? And we'll probably still, Trump is still going to try and push the boundaries, I'm sure. Um, so yeah, I mean, I certainly think the incompetence is hindering the authoritarianism, but even within that context, like there's still a lot of harm that can be done.
yeah, of course.
So it's not, it's not like completely kneecapping it. So it's just again like it's so hard to project because like we're just so far away from like a moment of reckoning.
Yeah,
Excuse me. And so when people do ask you for the solution, like I don't have any like great silver bullets here, but I think actually, the most important thing short term is to try to put pressure on these Republicans that are kind of in, whether it's like a purple district or, but, and this is only like a small subset, but excuse me, just whenever there are opportunities to put pressure on Republicans to break with the Trump program, that, in the short term, I think is going to be the most promising avenue of like trying to shake up the dynamic a little bit. Because Democrats, I mean, there's a lot of messaging going on, like there's a lot of jockeying and Democrats have a role to play in undermining Trump's. People get mad at Hakeem Jeffries when he says this, that like the one thing we can do is kind of like message and make the
Hmm.
case, but he's not wrong totally. Even if people would like for him to do more, but the votes that really matter right now are those Republicans that are kind of in the middle, especially with this reconciliation bill coming up. If that goes down in flames, it's going to be because Republicans, not because of Democrats. So
Exactly.
to me, in the short term, like putting pressure on Republicans to repudiate Trump, to try to talk some sense into him, or like to vote down the tariffs where they can, that in the short term ahead of 2026 are kind of the most promising ways that, we can hopefully make this country slightly less bad at this point, because like
Yeah.
better is too high of an aspiration until we get to an election, but we can at least kind of like contain the damage hopefully a little bit. So
Yeah.
that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, we're not building back better just yet.
No,
We have to, slightly worse is the first benchmark,
slightly worse.
and then we build back better. But no, you're right, and I think you know, the Wisconsin election gives us hope. The
Yep.
Florida, all those districts moving more democratically gives us hope. It's just like you're right. It's like grassroots. It's that people in the comments cheering you on what you were saying about just the people showing up, the town halls, the pressure because as Trump's approval rating continues to dip, like this is the lowest. I think CNN said it was the lowest in seven decades for the first
Yeah.
100 days since Eisenhower. Like that's he even beat himself, like that,
Yeah.
like from his first term, and that was, But I also like to
Right.
remind people, like even in the first term, Trump hadn't fired Comey until like 8 days from now,
Yep.
right? Like he fired Comey in May.
Yep.
So we are way, way, way ahead of the chaos of the first term, and it's really impacting. So if people just keep going, hit the gas, I think it'll have a major impact. But if you do have time, I had one more question for you,
Yep.
because I know you kind of coined the phrase "sane washing." I didn't see it anywhere else before you, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on what you think the media like role is right now. Do you think that the coverage of him is improving this time? And what is the vacuum like what do you think the media needs to be doing right now overall? And
Mm.
what role do you think they should be exerting at the moment?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this a little bit because I've noticed over the past like month or two that when it comes to economic policy, it's much harder for even like Fox to spin things because like you're dealing with numbers a lot of the time. So it's like GDP contracted, and like that's a really hard thing to spin. I mean, they're making their best efforts, but in a way that with some of the moral panics that Fox gets really invested in, like that's easier to kind of sensationalize like an anecdote or like one local story, but like in some ways the coverage of economics, despite like the spin of it, can be really damaging even on like the propaganda networks, because
Hmm.
like Fox Business has to talk about business news to a point. I mean,
Hmm.
I sometimes joke that it's Fox News with the stock ticker, but like
Yeah.
they do pretend to talk about business. But yeah, so in terms of like, is the media doing better or worse? That's a really like, I don't know. That's kind of a complex question. Like I still find, for instance, like CNN to be useful in that CNN still has enough cachet with Republicans where they will go on there. So you'll
Hmm.
get Tom Emmer on their morning show, and like those can be kind of substantial and newsworthy interviews. Where the hosts aren't like afraid to push back or kind of point out lies that Emmer or other Republicans might say on their airwaves. And so like I think that is a useful function still for accountability. And MSNBC to a lesser extent, you get fewer Republicans on there. But, I certainly thought the coverage during the campaign was like, broadly speaking, a big failure in that the
Yeah.
stakes weren't really conveyed to people.
Hmm.
I feel like Trump, he's good for the news industry in like kind of a very sort of craven way where like, people are kind of worried. So they tune in the news to see what's going on. Or like even today with Mike Walls being fired, CNN had the footage of him being like, he took the helicopter to get on Air
Oh
Force One with
yeah.
Trump, but they didn't let him on the plane. And like,
Yeah.
just these little things that are like kind of unique to Trump, where like that would never happen. Like, when Joe Biden was president, there was no footage like that of any firing.
Hmm.
So this stuff is good for like the news industry. I don't think it's good for Trump or for Republicans that stuff gets out there, and it does make me kind of nauseous to read like the the Maggie Haberman style, like, sources
Yeah.
close to the situation, or say, because it gives me like a really bad form of, it's almost like it triggers like a PTSD where it's like, man, I remember these from 8 years ago, and like we're
Yeah.
right back in this. Especially at first, I've become a little more, I've gotten used to them again now, that style of reporting. So I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like the media has really learned lessons in any meaningful way. We see this with like the caving of CBS to Trump's frivolous lawsuit.
Hmm.
Even ABC, the George Stephanopoulos lawsuit, I think kind of chastened him. Where like if you watch his show now, like the interviews are not anywhere near as hard hitting as they were a year ago. So I think the incentive structure is like pretty much the same, but I think that's where like yourself, myself, like independent creators, like it's really vital to support people that you think are doing good work, because that's kind of the best way to create alternatives and incentivize people doing better. I think Midas does a pretty good job overall, so I'm happy to see that those guys have really kind of blown up and
Yeah.
have such a large platform at this point, and like are pulling in these big names to do kind of exclusive interviews with them and stuff. So I wish I could say that, like, I feel like lessons have been learned, and it's disconcerting because, like, I really thought in 2020 the media did improve. Like
Hmm.
that year, calling out the lies that Trump was saying about like mail voting, for instance, or about COVID. Like the coverage of that campaign, I thought was a big improvement over 2016, broadly speaking. And then it was like, I don't know what it was like. People just kind of lost their minds over inflation, or I don't know what it was, but
Yeah.
like, it was just like there was this thirst to kind of like just forget about all the horrors of Trump and sort of, sanitize him as like this, the Pepsi to Biden's Coke kind of thing. And like,
Yeah.
even think back on like the CNN debate where they weren't fact checking him. And like, I get that that was kind of like the agreement that they entered into, but like, it was such an abdication. And it really did, I think, play a role in getting us where we're at now, because, I had friends in my life where like, you talk politics with them and they're not necessarily like politically invested like I am, but like, right away the trans athletes thing would come up. And it's like, to
Exactly.
me, it
Yeah.
was just, it's like there's like a half dozen of them in the whole country. Like, well, Democrats shouldn't talk about it so much. It's like it's
They
the
don't.
Republicans who are talking about it.
Exactly.
Like the Democrats get asked about it constantly because people like you think it's, like this big issue, but it's just stuff like that was so frustrating. People kind of took their eye off the ball and sort of got distracted by nonsense. And so maybe we do need to like kind of fully lay on the stove here and just like feel the pain. And pain can be a really good teacher, I've heard people say. And I think it is true. Maybe that's what it's going to take. Cause like, yeah, I mean, I think this applies to the media as well, where like they wanted Trump, they're getting Trump, and we'll see
And
if that's good for them or not.
yeah, and
Yeah.
now they're getting the ramifications and the
Yep.
freedom of speech being targeted and the First Amendment and all of that. And yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think in our analysis, the 2024 election coverage is right because I was super frustrated myself. Like they tried to act like he wasn't like as if we didn't see January 6th, as if we could just pretend that he isn't who he is. And like you said, the incentive structures around covering him was just to amplify him, just to get the ratings. The CNN town hall was the kind of the first big one back when
Yep.
Chris Litt flew too close to the sun, gets fired and exiled,
Yep.
rightfully so. And I just think this time, you're right. I think almost, I think they still play a role in helping shape some of the overall narratives. And I know Trump really cares about how they cover him. So I think it's important
Yeah.
for them to keep the fire there. But I really feel that like their role is kind of decreasing a little bit. Like, you go on a news hit, and you kind of want to wish you were clipped by you or Asen, right? To actually have it be really seen, because it just shows how the viewership of these cable networks sometimes like a few million a week. It's like, well, that's like just one video on YouTube, right? So it's like I really think that the role of mainstream media is important, but we're seeing now independent journalists, like you said, like yourself, like Midas,
Mm.
like these people who are really rising. And I guess on that note, like for you guys watching, make sure to subscribe to support this madman here who's watching every single moment of the Trump presidency.
Trying to.
Again, back in action. Like subscribe to Public Notice, become a paid subscriber if you can, because that's what moves this stuff forward. Subscribe to my newsletter. It's only a little over a year old, but I'm back in action here. I used to run Rant Media back in the day.
Yep.
Maybe you might revive
Hmm.
a version of that in the future, but
Well,
potentially been thinking about it. But yeah, subscribe to my newsletter, become a paid subscriber to both of us if you can. And because independent media is the thing that's needed right now. TikTok,
yep.
especially everywhere. It's about spreading that truth. So Do you have any final comments or anything you want to highlight that you're working on right now for anyone who's watching?
Yeah, I mean, if you're into the conversation we had today, you'll probably like my newsletter, Public Notice. It's at publicnotice.co. You can find me on all the socials. I'm not too hard to find, although I guess I am banned on TikTok now or shadow banned, so maybe a little harder to find there. But anyway, but Ahmed, yeah, really great to chat with you, and I'll reciprocate by having you on our show on Friday afternoon, sometime coming up soon. I'll sidebar with you about that, but appreciate all the nice comments. I see, people saying some nice things down there, so that's great, and really nice chatting, and look forward to chatting again before too long.
Yeah, yeah, appreciate the invite. I'd be happy to come on. And it was great to just finally meet you, man. We've
Yeah,
recommended each other Substacks, been,
yep,
I've been sharing your clips for an eternity now, and we finally sat down to talk. So yeah, I'd be happy to come
good.
on. And everyone who's watching, I think you can actually like literally subscribe at the top of the screen just by
Mm,
tapping it. So come through, subscribe to us. We're gonna be keep doing this work. Aaron's gonna be clipping, maintaining his sanity as best he can. I'm gonna be writing, doing what I can to push back on all this. And you guys stay tuned, stay balanced, but don't burn out. All right. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So uh, keep at it. But thank you, Aaron. I appreciate your time,
Take
brother.
care. Nice chatting with you.
All right. Take it easy.